Surveys are a major instrument used in social work research. The other type of instrument we administer in social work research includes standardized scales. We are going to discuss standardized scales in this lecture, as well as related content on validity and reliability in research. Standardized scales are much different from the do-it-yourself surveys. As stated on the slide above, standardized scales are used to capture a construct or variable of interest. Standardized scales can measure constructs like depression, happiness, quality of life, aggression, attitudes towards drugs, risky behaviors, etc. These are instruments that have been designed and rigorously tested by a researcher or group of researchers. Normed means that a scale was developed by administering the instrument to a large representative sample whose demographic characteristics are known. A standardized scale is not something a student can create for this class. In general, a standardized scale measures a construct of interest and gives you a total scale score for that construct. For example, let's say that an ABC depression scale existed. The ABC depression scale has a total scale score of 10, lower levels of depression, to 80, higher levels of depression. All standardized scales have information provided by its author. That tells you what construct the scale measures, how the scale was developed, how to score it. You can also find a standardized scale by searching in Google. However, many standardized scales you find on the internet will charge you for ordering the scale. Some are very expensive. Sometimes you can find a scale free of charge that you can download. There is also a book by Corcoran and Fisher listed in the recommended readings in your syllabus on the third floor stacks of the TSU library that is filled with free standardized scales. Each scale comes with information like you see on this slide. The information accompanying each scale tells you what it measures, how it was developed, and how to score it. In general, it is an ethical expectation that if you wish to use an instrument that has been developed by another author, you ask the author for permission to use or adapt that instrument. You can see here that the GSE scale was developed in the late 70s and has been published in 26 different languages. It measures the construct self-efficacy, and you can see that the author has provided you with the definition of self-efficacy if you aren't familiar with this term. This information also tells you the GSE has 10 items. Let's take a look at the 10 items on the next slide. I have recreated the scale on this slide for you. This is what the scale would look like on paper for a participant to fill out. If you were interested in studying, for example, the change in self-efficacy of your clients after a parenting program you implemented, you might administer this scale to your clients before the parenting program and again after the parenting program. Clients would answer each item by putting a check mark next to how much each item is true of them. You would need to read about how to score this GSE scale. You can see on this slide the information the author has provided to you for this. Each item is scored on a 4-point scale. Not true at all equals 1 point. Hardly true equals 2 points. Moderately true equals 3 points. Exactly true equals 4 points. For each participant, you add up the number of points for the total scale score. The total scale scores range from 10 to 40, with higher scores indicating higher self-efficacy. Each of your clients would have a total scale score before your parenting program, then again after your parenting program when you administer the scale again. You administer the scale after your parenting program too, in order to assess any overall changes in the self-efficacy of your parents. You want to see if your parenting program had an impact on your client's self-efficacy. What research design is this? What statistical test would you use to test your H1 that a parenting program increases parent self-efficacy? The research design is the descriptive or quasi-experimental design. O sub 1 X O sub 2. The statistical test you would use is the paired sample t-test. Remember, you are testing your clients, one group, before, pre, and after, post your intervention, to see if the intervention had an impact on self-efficacy levels. Imagine this is the completed GSE scale from one of your clients. What is this person's total scale score? If you answered 16, you are correct. This means that on a scale of 10 to 40, we interpret this person's score as having low self-efficacy. Imagine this is the completed GSE scale from one of your clients. What is this person's total scale score? If you answered 34, you were correct. This means that on a scale of 10 to 40, we interpret this person's score as having high self-efficacy. You will read a lot about validity and reliability in your textbook, so we are going to discuss here how these two terms apply to standardized scales in quantitative research. There are 4 main types of validity you need to be familiar with: content validity, construct validity, face validity, and criterion validity. In general, validity tells you, did I measure what I set out to measure? Content validity is the extent to which the content of an instrument or scale reflects the concept being measured. Construct validity is the degree to which the construct or abstraction it sets out to measure is measured. Face validity is the degree to which an instrument or scale appears to capture the construct on its surface. In other words, by briefly reading over the instrument items, does it appear to measure what it's supposed to measure? This is perhaps the least scientific way of establishing validity, but one of the ways nonetheless. Criterion validity will be discussed on the next slide. Criterion validity is the degree to which an instrument or scale relates to an external criterion. It is similar to construct validity and is sometimes used interchangeably. There are 2 types of criterion validity: concurrent validity, the degree to which different measures of a construct yield similar results, and predictive validity, the extent to which an instrument can predict future performance or status based on current performance or status. Let's talk about establishing criterion validity as well as construct validity. Using our GSE scale, let's say we want to establish criterion validity or construct validity of this scale. What we would do is to administer the GSE scale to a sample of participants and also administer another scale, for example, the ABC self-efficacy inventory, that also measures self-efficacy. We would give each participant a total scale score for each scale and then compute a Pearson's R on these two scales. This would tell us how related these two scales were. We would expect they would have a strong relationship since they are designed to measure the same construct. If they had a strong relationship with each other, we could argue that the GSE scale had a high level of validity. We could repeat this process again, but this time administer the GSE and a scale that measures an unrelated construct, like the attitude towards drug scale. When we compute a Pearson's R, we should see low to no relationship between these scales, since they measure unrelated concepts. Reliability is a completely different concept than validity. Reliability can tell us one of two main pieces of information. Are the results, scores of the instrument or scale, consistent over time? And do all the items measure the same construct? In order to establish temporal stability, we would use the test-retest method. In other words, we might give the same group of participants the GSE scale once and then administer it again. Technically, if this GSE scale was reliable, a person's total scale score should be about the same each time it was given, in absence of an intervention or event or manipulation to change it. In order to establish homogeneity, we often use either the split half method or compute a Cronbach's alpha. For example, to establish the split half method, we might take the first 5 items of the GSE scale and compare them to the last 5 items on that scale to test how well each half is related to the other half of the scale. You can do this using the SPSS software. Cronbach's alpha is another important way to establish reliability of an instrument or scale. This you can also compute in SPSS. The number you get in SPSS will tell you the level of reliability of the scale. Basically, this process computes Pearson's R between all 10 items on the GSE scale, for example. If all items are related to each other, that means the items reliably measure the construct. In SPSS, this is how to compute a Cronbach's alpha, measure of reliability. After you enter your participant scale data in SPSS, you would click on Analyze, Scale, Reliability Analysis. You would move all the scale items over to the box Items on the right. The default setting here is to alpha, which means that a Cronbach's alpha will be computed on the instrument or scale. All of the instrument or scale items have been moved over to the right-hand box for analysis. On the far right of the slide, you see the output file. The output file in SPSS is the file that appears once you run your analysis. You can see here under the reliability statistics box that the Cronbach's alpha is equal to 0.590. What does that mean? Use the key that interprets Cronbach's alpha in the box towards the upper left-hand side of the slide. A Cronbach's alpha of 0.590